The wind howled through the trees as Sarah stumbled deeper into the forest. She had been lost for hours, her phone dead, her only company the eerie sound of the branches creaking in the cold. The sun had disappeared behind a thick layer of clouds hours ago, and now the darkness pressed in on her from all sides. It was supposed to be a simple hike. The trail was well marked, the weather clear. But somewhere along the way, she'd taken a wrong turn. Now, she was trapped in the heart of the woods, and the only thing that seemed certain was the growing sense of unease that crawled up her spine with each step. As Sarah trudged forward, her breath visible in the air, she heard it a soft, distant whisper. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then it grew louder. Not the rustle of leaves or the swaying of branches, this was a voice, or something like it. She froze, heart hammering. The voice seemed to come from all around her, a language she couldn't understand, yet it filled her with a primal dread. Her blood ran cold. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. There was no reply, only the rustling of the forest around her. Another whisper. This time it was clearer. "Sarah." She spun around, but there was no one. The forest was as silent as it had been before. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She wasn't alone. Something was watching her. With shaking hands, she grabbed a flashlight from her bag and flicked it on, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. The light illuminated the dense undergrowth, but there was nothing unusual, just trees, rocks, and shadows. Yet, the feeling of being observed only intensified. Another whisper, this time louder, almost urgent. "Sarah, you should have never come." Her pulse raced. The voice seemed to come from just behind her. She whirled around, her heart skipping a beat. The flashlight trembled in her grip, but again nothing. Just the black void of the forest, dark and endless. A sudden, sharp crack echoed behind her like a twig snapping underfoot. She whipped around, her chest tight with panic. A shadow darted across her path, too quick to see, just a blur in the corner of her eye. "Run, Sarah," the voice urged. Fear surged in her veins. Without thinking, she turned and sprinted down the narrow path, her breath ragged, her mind a blur of terror. The whispers grew louder, closer, until they were all around her, muttering in a chorus of cold, hollow voices. "It's too late. You can't escape." Panic clawed at her chest as she ran, each footstep echoing like thunder in the silence of the forest. The shadows seemed to stretch toward her, the trees shifting and moving in her peripheral vision. Every time she looked back, the world behind her had changed, the path twisting and warping as though the forest itself was alive, hunting her. Her legs burned, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. The whispers were no longer words, they were shrill, desperate screams, the sound of things being dragged through the woods, just out of sight. She stumbled over a root and fell hard to the ground. The flashlight flew from her hand, rolling away into the dark. Her body ached, but she didn't have time to recover. She scrambled to her feet and ran again, her mind barely able to process what was happening. But then, as if the forest itself had closed in around her, everything stopped. The whispers ceased, the wind died. The trees were still, and in the silence, there was only the sound of her own breathing, shallow and quick. She looked around, heart racing. There were no more shadows, no more whispers, no more movement. The forest had gone eerily still. "Sarah." The voice was right behind her now, so close that she could feel the cold breath against her ear. Her stomach dropped as she slowly turned around, dreading what she might see. A figure stood before her, tall and cloaked in darkness, its features hidden in the inky blackness of the night. The air around it shimmered, like the figure was made of shadows itself, an unholy distortion of reality. "You shouldn't have run," it whispered, its voice a twisted, guttural version of her own. "You've already lost." Before Sarah could scream, the figure reached out, and the world collapsed into darkness. When the first rays of morning sunlight touched the forest floor, they found only one thing, an empty trail, littered with broken branches, but no trace of Sarah. The whispers, however, had not ceased. They lingered, carried by the wind, drifting like the dead leaves in the breeze, waiting for the next lost soul to wander too deep into the woods.